What if the greatest treasure isn't buried in the ground, but hidden in plain sight, walking among us every day, cloaked in invisibility? What if the key to $1 billion empire wasn't a prestigious degree or a ruthless mind, but a simple act of kindness offered in a rundown diner on a rainy Tuesday night? This is the story of how one forgotten woman, armed with nothing but a grieving heart and a quiet strength, reminded a king of what it truly means to be rich. Elara once had a life filled with color and sound. It was a life of shared laughter over burnt toast with her husband, Robert, a life of whispered dreams in the dark, a life where the numbers on a spreadsheet weren't just data, but a language of hope they spoke together. Robert had been a dreamer, a brilliant but reckless day trader who saw symphonies in stock market fluctuations. Elara, with her steady, analytical mind, had been his anchor. She learned his language, not just to support him, but because she found a strange, beautiful logic in the chaos. She could see the patterns he missed, the human fear and greed that drove the lines up and down. They were a team. But then the sickness came, a slow, merciless thief that stole Robert's energy, his dreams, and finally, his breath. The medical bills piled up into a mountain of paper and dread, a monument to their losing battle. When he was gone, all that was left was the silence, the mountain of debt, and the ghost of a life that used to be. Now, Elara's world was muted, a grayscale existence lived in the margins. By day, she was a ghost in the hallowed halls of Vance Holdings, one of the world's most powerful financial firms. She wore a drab gray uniform, pushed a cart of cleaning supplies, and remained utterly invisible to the titans of industry who strode past her, their minds on mergers and acquisitions, never once noticing the woman polishing the glass that reflected their own success. Her nights were for herself. Her one small ritual, her single thread of connection to the world, was a solitary dinner at the Greasy Spoon, a diner where the coffee was bitter and the vinyl on the booze was cracked. It was cheap, it was anonymous, and it was hers. Tonight the rain lashed against the diner's large window, blurring the city lights into a watercolor painting of loneliness. Elara sat in her usual booth, nursing a bowl of vegetable soup, the steam warming her face. She was tracing the rim of her water glass when a hesitant voice broke through her reverie. "Excuse me? Ma'am?" Elara looked up. A woman with tired eyes and a threadbare coat stood beside her table, a small boy huddled against her leg. The boy was pale, shivering, his small hands tucked into the pockets of a jacket that was too thin for the biting November chill. "I'm so sorry to bother you," the woman said, her voice soft but strained. "Every other table is taken. My son's cold. Can we possibly sit here?" "Just until the rain lets up." Elara's heart gave a familiar, painful lurch. She saw not a stranger, but a reflection of her own past struggles, the worry, the desperation to provide simple comfort against a world that felt too cold. She looked at the cramped space, her half-eaten soup, her single plate. Some might have hesitated. Some might have felt their small sanctuary invaded. But Elara only saw a cold child. "Of course," she said, her voice warmer than she'd heard it in months. She immediately slid over, making as much room as she could. "Please sit. Don't stand in the draft." The woman's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you. Thank you so much." They settled into the booth, the boy still shivering. Elara acted without thinking. She unwrapped the worn, cashmere scarf from her neck, the last gift Robert had ever given her, and gently draped it over the boy's small shoulders. "Here," she whispered. "This will help." The boy looked up at her with wide, grateful eyes, and for the first time in a very long time, Elara felt a flicker of the woman she used to be. Across the diner, in a dark corner booth shielded from view, Julian Vance watched the entire exchange. His suit was bespoke, a dark armor of charcoal gray that probably cost more than Elara earned in a year. His face was a mask of cold neutrality, but his eyes, a piercing shade of blue, missed nothing. He was the Vance of Vance Holdings, a man who inherited an empire and multiplied it tenfold, a modern-day Midas whose name was a synonym for power and ruthless efficiency. He was also a man drowning in his own gilded cage, surrounded by sycophants who told him what he wanted to hear and rivals who circled like sharks, waiting for a single drop of blood in the water. He had come to despise the calculated, transactional nature of his world. So, he had devised a test. A simple, secret experiment. He'd hired this woman, an actress, and her son to play a part. He'd sent them into a dozen different establishments over the past month, armed with that one simple, vulnerable request. He wanted to find one person. Just one. Someone whose compassion wasn't a performance, whose integrity wasn't for sale. He had watched as they were turned away, ignored, or offered help with a sigh of condescending charity. He was beginning to lose faith. And then he saw Elara. He watched her immediate, unconditional welcome. He saw her give away what might have been one of her few precious possessions. The scarf had a worn look of sentimental value, without a moment's hesitation. She wasn't doing it for an audience. She didn't know she was being watched. It was pure, uncalculated kindness. As the woman and boy sat, Elara engaged them in quiet conversation. She didn't pry, but she listened. She learned the boy's name was Leo. She asked him about school. She offered him one of her crackers, which he nibbled on gratefully. She spoke to the mother with a gentle empathy that made the woman's fictional story of hardship feel real even to Julian, who had written the script. Julian noted how Elara never once complained about her own life. When the woman asked what she did, Elara simply said, "I help keep a big office building downtown running smoothly." There was no shame in her voice, only a quiet dignity. An hour later, the rain subsided. The actress, following her instructions, stood to leave. "I can't thank you enough," she said, her voice thick with genuine emotion that went beyond her role. She had been moved by this woman's grace. As she helped her son with his jacket, she accidentally let a small, crisp business card fall from her pocket onto the seat. "You've been a true blessing." Elara simply smiled. "Get him home and warm." She watched them leave, then noticed the card. She picked it up. The embossed lettering was stark and authoritative, Vance Holdings. Below it, a single name, Julian Vance, CO. And a private number. Elara stared at it, a frown creasing her brow. She assumed the woman must have found it, or perhaps worked there in some capacity and dropped it by mistake. Tucking it into her pocket with the intention of turning it into the lost and found at work the next day, she finished her cold soup, the warmth from her small act of kindness doing more to chase away the chill than the soup ever could. She had no idea that she hadn't just shared her table, she had stepped onto a stage she never knew existed, and the director himself had just decided she was perfect for the starring role. The next morning, the world was back to its familiar gray. Elara was on the 48th floor, the executive level, polishing the vast mahogany conference table until it gleamed like a dark mirror. She could see her own indistinct reflection, a faceless woman in a gray uniform. The card was heavy in her pocket. She was about to head to the main reception desk to turn it in when a severe-looking woman in a sharp pantsuit approached her. "Are you Elara?" the woman asked, her tone clipped and impatient, as if speaking to a piece of furniture that had suddenly learned to talk. Elara was startled. "Yes. Mr. Vance will see you now. In his office." Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. Mr. Vance? The CO? It had to be a mistake. A complaint. Had she missed a spot? Cleaned something improperly? She followed the woman down a silent, plushly carpeted hallway to a set of imposing double doors. The office was less a room and more a kingdom. One entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window offering a godlike view of the city below. A man stood with his back to her, looking out at his domain. He turned, and Elara's breath caught. It was the man from the diner. The man from the dark corner booths she'd barely noticed. He was taller than she'd realized, his presence filling the cavernous space. "Elara," Julian Vance said, his voice a low baritone that was accustomed to absolute command. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." He gestured to a leather chair that probably cost more than her car. She sat hesitantly on the edge of it, her rough work trousers a stark contrast to the supple leather. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I found your card last night in the diner. A woman must have dropped it. I was going to turn it in." Julian offered a small, almost imperceptible smile. "There's no misunderstanding. The woman, Clara, doesn't work for me in the traditional sense. I hired her. And her son." Elara stared at him, her mind struggling to process his words. "Hired her? For what?" "To find you," he said simply. He walked around his massive desk and leaned against it, his gaze intense. "For the past month, I have been conducting an experiment. I've been looking for a person of character. Not a character reference on a resume, but true, observable character. I was looking for someone with integrity, empathy, and decency when no one is watching. Last night, I found that person." Elara was speechless. This powerful, intimidating man had orchestrated the entire encounter in the diner. It felt surreal, like a dream. "But why?" she finally managed to ask. "Because this company," he said, gesturing to the city beyond the window, "is rotting from the inside out. It's filled with people who are brilliant on paper but are morally bankrupt. They are driven by greed and ego. I have a project, a multi-billion-dollar acquisition, that is failing. Catastrophically. My entire executive team tells me it's market volatility, that we should cut our losses. But I don't believe them. I believe the problem is with the people. And I can't trust anyone's analysis because they all have their own agendas." He paused, his blue eyes locking onto hers. "I need a fresh perspective. I need someone who sees the world differently. Someone I can trust implicitly. I saw your kindness last night, but I saw something else, too. In your eyes. A sharpness. An intelligence that you keep hidden. When Clara asked what you did, you answered with dignity. You possess a quiet strength that this building, for all its noise and power, desperately lacks." He pushed off the desk and stood before her. "Elara, I want to hire you. Not as a cleaner. I want you to be a special consultant, reporting directly to me. I want you to look at this failing project. I want you to read the reports, analyze the data, and tell me what you see. Tell me the truth that no one else will." The offer was so audacious, so impossible, that Elara almost laughed. Her? A consultant? She hadn't looked at a financial statement in years. She was a widow with a mountain of debt who cleaned floors for a living. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "you don't know anything about me. I have no qualifications. No degree in finance. My resume is non-existent. Your resume is what you did last night in that diner." He countered, his voice firm. "That is the only qualification that matters to me right now. I am offering you a salary of $500,000 for a 6-month contract. And a chance to do something that matters. Will you accept?" Elara looked down at her hands, calloused from mops and cleaning chemicals. She thought of Robert, of the debt, of the gray, silent life she was living. This was madness. It was a fairy tale. But for the first time since Robert's death, a spark of defiance, a flicker of the sharp, capable woman she used to be, ignited within her. She lifted her chin and met his gaze. "Yes," she said. "I accept." The transition was jarring. One day, Elara was pushing a cart. The next, she was being shown to a sleek, minimalist office on the 48th floor, not far from Julian's own. The scent of lemon polish was replaced by the smell of expensive leather and fresh coffee. Her gray uniform was replaced by a simple but elegant pantsuit, purchased for her by Julian's assistant in a whirlwind shopping trip that left Elara feeling dizzy and out of place. The news of the CEO's new pet project spread through the executive wing like a virus. The whispers followed her down the hall. They called her the cleaner, the Cinderella consultant. The epicenter of this storm of scorn was Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a senior vice president, a man whose ambition was as sharp and tailored as his Italian suits. The failing acquisition, a tech firm called Omnigen, was his project. He had championed it, pushed it through the board, and its failure was a stain on his otherwise immaculate record. When Julian introduced Alara in an executive meeting, Marcus's smile was a predatory slash. "A consultant?" he'd said, his voice dripping with condescension as he looked Alara up and down. "With what firm? What's her background?" "Her background is that she has my complete confidence," Julian had replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "She will have full access to all Omnigen files. You are all to cooperate with her completely." Marcus saw Alara not as a colleague, but as an existential threat. This woman, this nobody, was a walking, breathing indictment of his failure. He was determined to crush her. His cooperation was a masterclass in passive aggression. He provided Alara with data dumps, terabytes of disorganized, context-free information. He forgot to include key reports. In meetings, when she would ask a tentative question, he would cut her off with a patronizing, "That's a bit simplistic. The market dynamics are far more complex than that." He treated her like a child who had wandered into the adults' table. Alara felt the weight of their collective doubt pressing down on her. She was an imposter, a fraud. The numbers on the screen blurred. The corporate jargon swam in her head. She would sit in her sterile office late into the night, the panoramic view of the glittering city feeling more like a judgment than a privilege. The only person who seemed even remotely on her side, albeit reluctantly, was David Chen. David was Julian's chief legal counsel and his oldest friend. He was a cautious, pragmatic man who viewed Julian's diner test as an act of corporate insanity. "Julian, what are you doing?" David had confronted him in his office, the door firmly shut. "You've put an unknown, unqualified woman in charge of dissecting a multi-billion-dollar disaster. The board is already sharpening their knives. Marcus is whipping them into a frenzy. You're handing him your head on a platter." Julian remained calm, staring out his window. "I trust my instincts, David. And my instincts tell me Alara is the key. Instincts don't hold up in a shareholder lawsuit." David shot back, exasperated. "This isn't a game. This is your family's legacy. Maybe my family's legacy needs a little less legacy and a little more integrity," Julian said quietly. "Just give her a chance. That's all I ask." David agreed, but his skepticism was a palpable force. He would occasionally stop by Alara's office, offering curt, professional assistance, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and suspicion. He was waiting for her to fail, to prove him right so he could begin the damage control. One night, overwhelmed and close to tears, Alara almost gave up. She packed her few personal items into her bag, ready to walk into Julian's office and tell him she couldn't do it. But as she stood, her gaze fell on a small, framed photo she had brought from home, the only personal touch in the impersonal office. It was of her and Robert, laughing on a park bench. She remembered his relentless optimism, his belief in her. "You see the music, Elle," he used to say, tapping a stock chart. "Everyone else just sees the notes. You hear the whole song." Taking a deep breath, she sat back down. She would not let Marcus Thorne, or David Chen, or any of them, break her. She would do it for Robert. She would do it for the woman in the gray uniform who deserved more than invisibility. She turned back to the screen, her eyes narrowed with a new resolve. She wasn't just looking at the notes anymore. She was going to find the music. And so, Alara began to work. She pushed aside the intimidation and the doubt, and focused on the one thing she truly understood, the language of numbers. She worked with a quiet, ferocious intensity that astonished the few people who bothered to notice. She arrived before the sun rose and left long after the city lights had painted the sky. Her office became a cocoon of data, the walls covered in printouts, flow charts, and handwritten notes. She wasn't just reading the reports, she was absorbing them, letting the torrent of information wash over her until the currents and eddies became clear. This was the gift she and Robert had cultivated together. She could see the narrative woven into the data. She could feel the ghost in the machine, the human behaviors, the small deviations, the subtle hesitations that the algorithms and executive summaries always missed. The OmniGen acquisition was supposed to be a triumph. It was a cutting-edge AI company with revolutionary technology. On paper, it was flawless. But its post-acquisition performance had been a nosedive. Marcus Thorne's official reports blamed an unexpectedly aggressive competitor and a sudden shift in the market. It was a neat, tidy explanation that everyone on the 48th floor had accepted. But Alara wasn't looking at the explanation. She was looking at the raw data, the thousands of individual transactions, the daily performance logs, the internal communications. For 2 weeks, she saw nothing but the story Marcus wanted her to see. Then, late one Thursday night, fueled by black coffee and sheer stubbornness, she found it. It was a tiny thread, almost invisible. A series of micro-trades executed by OmniGen's internal asset management division that were consistently, fractionally, underperforming. They were so small they would register as statistical noise to any standard analysis. But there were hundreds of them. Thousands. Always selling a split second too late, buying a split second too early. It was a pattern of deliberate, carefully calibrated losses. It was like watching a ship being sunk not by a torpedo, but by 1,000 tiny leaks, each one drilled with surgical precision. Her heart began to pound. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't market volatility. This was sabotage. She started cross-referencing the timestamps of the trades with Vance Holdings' own network activity logs, a level of detail she knew no one else would have bothered with. And there it was. A faint but undeniable digital signature. The trades were being initiated through a series of shell corporations, but the authorization signal, the ghost signal, was originating from a single encrypted IP address. An IP address that, after hours of painstaking work, she traced back to a server routed through the Cayman Islands, a server that was, for one brief microsecond every day, pinged by a terminal right here. On the 48th floor. It was the digital equivalent of a footprint at a crime scene. She didn't know whose terminal it was yet, but she had her proof. The project wasn't just failing. It was being bled dry from the inside. The next morning, she requested a meeting with Julian. She was nervous, her hands clutching a single folder containing her findings. When she entered his office, he was on the phone, his voice sharp and commanding. He saw her, ended the call abruptly, and gave her his full attention. "What have you found?" he asked. She laid the folder on his desk and, in a clear, steady voice, walked him through her discovery. She didn't use jargon or complicated financial terms. She told it as a story. The story of 1,000 tiny cuts. She pointed to the charts, the logs, the single, damning IP address. Julian listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he was silent for a full minute, staring at the papers. Alara's anxiety grew. Had she overstepped? Was it all just a wild conspiracy theory? Finally, he looked up, and for the first time, the mask of the cold, ruthless CEO was gone. In its place was a look of profound respect. "I knew it," he whispered. "I knew something was wrong. But I never would have found this. No one would have." That evening, he asked her to stay, to walk him through it again. They ordered dinner to the office, a simple meal of salads and sandwiches that felt more comfortable and real than any five-star restaurant. As they ate, the conversation shifted from data points to their own lives. Alara found herself talking about Robert, not just his illness, but his passion, his humor, how he had taught her to see the world. Julian, in turn, opened up about the crushing weight of his father's legacy, the isolation of being at the top, the profound loneliness of being surrounded by people who only wanted something from him. "That test in the diner," he admitted, looking out at the city lights. "It wasn't just about finding someone to help with the company. It was about finding someone I could trust. Period. I was beginning to think that person didn't exist." In the warm glow of his office lamp, they were no longer a CEO and a consultant. They were just Julian and Alara, two lonely souls who had found an unexpected connection in the most unlikely of circumstances. David Chin, stopping by to drop off some legal documents, saw them through the glass door of the office. He saw them talking, not as a boss and an employee, but as equals, as friends. He saw the genuine smile on Julian's face, a sight he hadn't seen in years. And in that moment, David's skepticism finally melted away. He realized Julian hadn't made a reckless gamble. He had made the wisest investment of his life. He wasn't just saving his company, he was saving himself. David knocked softly and entered. "Elara," he said, his tone now warm and respectful. "Your analysis is brilliant. But it's circumstantial. We have a digital footprint, but we can't tie it to a person without more. The man behind this is smart. He's covered his tracks. He was right." And as Elara continued her investigation, she realized the man behind it was not just smart, he was vicious. Marcus Thorne felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. He saw the closed-door meetings between Elara and Julian. He saw the newfound respect in David Chen's eyes. He knew she was getting close. He had to act, and he had to make it brutal. He made a call to a journalist he kept on his payroll, a man with a venomous pen and no conscience. 2 days later, the story broke. It was the front page of a notorious online business tabloid, complete with a grainy photo of Elara in her cleaner's uniform and a slick, smiling headshot of Julian. The headline was designed for maximum damage. "Vance's Cinderella consultant, billionaire's pet project is a penniless widow drowning in debt. Charity case or corporate catastrophe?" The article was a masterpiece of character assassination. It detailed Elara's crippling medical debt, painting her not as a grieving widow but as a desperate, grasping gold digger. It mocked her lack of education, quoting anonymous insiders, who called her incompetent and a complete joke. It framed Julian's decision as an act of either pitiful charity or delusional madness, questioning his fitness to lead the company. The fallout was immediate and explosive. The company's stock dipped. The board members were furious, their phones ringing off the hook. The entire 48th floor was a hotbed of gossip and speculation. The whispers that had once followed Elara down the hall became open stares of contempt. She walked through a sea of hostile faces, the words from the article burning in her mind. They had taken her grief, her private pain, and twisted it into a weapon against her. She felt stripped bare, humiliated. She hid in her office, the blinds drawn, unable to face the judgment. She expected a call from Julian, a quiet dismissal, an apology for the trouble she'd caused. The call came, but it wasn't what she expected. "Elara." Julian's voice was calm but laced with a cold fury she'd never heard before. "I've called an emergency board meeting. For this afternoon. I need you there." "Me?" she stammered. "Why? So they can all throw stones at me in person?" "No," he said, his voice softening slightly. "So you can show them how wrong they are. I believe in you, Elara. Now you need to believe in yourself. Bring everything you have. Don't hold back." The boardroom was a lion's den. A long, polished table surrounded by a dozen stern-faced men and women, the guardians of the Vance Empire. They looked at Elara as she entered with a mixture of anger and pity. Marcus Thorne sat near the head of the table, his expression one of smug, feigned concern. He was the picture of stability in the face of his CEO's apparent breakdown. Julian stood at the head of the table, a lone figure of defiance. "I've called this meeting to address the rumors and the article that was published this morning," he began, his voice ringing with authority. "And to put an end to the speculation regarding my judgment and the competency of my new special consultant, Ms. Elara Vance." He said her name with a deliberate respect that made Marcus flinch. "Many of you are demanding her termination. You believe she is a liability. You are wrong." He turned to Elara. "Ms. Vance has been analyzing the OmniGen acquisition. She has discovered some irregularities that my entire team of highly paid, Ivy League-educated executives completely missed. Elara, the floor is yours." All eyes turned to her. Her hands trembled as she placed her laptop on the table. She could feel Marcus's burning gaze, willing her to fail. She took a deep breath, picturing Robert's encouraging smile. She thought of the woman in the gray uniform, and a surge of protective anger washed away her fear. She began to speak. Her voice was quiet at first, but it grew in strength and confidence with every word. She didn't just present data, she wove a narrative. She explained the 1,000 tiny cuts, the carefully orchestrated losses. She brought up the charts, the graphs, the digital footprints, explaining them in simple, undeniable terms. The board members, who had been ready to dismiss her, began to lean forward, their expressions shifting from skepticism to intrigue. "The sabotage is brilliant in its subtlety," she explained, her voice steady. "It was designed to look like market fluctuation. But the saboteur made one mistake. Greed." She projected a new set of data onto the main screen. The money being siphoned from OmniGen wasn't just disappearing. It was being funneled. Through a series of shell corporations, it was being used to short-sell Vance Holdings' own stock, betting against our success. Every time OmniGen underperformed, our stock took a small hit, and someone made a fortune. A murmur went through the room. This was no longer just mismanagement. This was treason. "And I know who," Alara said, her voice dropping, drawing every person in the room into a vortex of suspense. She looked directly at Marcus Thorne. The digital signature of the saboteur, the ghost signal, was routed through a Cayman Islands server. A server that was paid for by a holding company called Thorne Assets. I believe the name is familiar. Marcus shot to his feet, his face pale with rage. "This is outrageous. An accusation without proof. This cleaner has concocted a fantasy to save her own skin." "It's not a fantasy, Marcus," a new voice said. David Chen stepped forward from the back of the room, holding a thick legal binder. "It's a fact. Once Alara gave us the thread to pull on, we unraveled the whole thing. We subpoenaed the server records this morning. The payments for the server, the incorporation documents for the shell companies. Your signature is on all of it." He opened the binder and placed the document in front of the lead board member. It was a wire transfer confirmation from Thorne Assets to one of the shell corporations. Marcus's signature was at the bottom, clear as day. The room was utterly silent. Marcus Thorne's carefully constructed world crumbled around him in an instant. His blustering denials died in his throat as he stared at the proof of his betrayal. He looked from the damning document to Alara's calm, resolute face, and then to Julian's icy, unforgiving stare. He had underestimated her. They all had. They saw a cleaner, a widow, a victim. They never saw the brilliant mind, the quiet warrior. The lead board member, a formidable woman named Eleanor Vance, Julian's aunt, looked at the evidence and then at Marcus, her eyes filled with cold disgust. "Security," she said, her voice like cracking ice. "Escort Mr. Thorne from the building. David, you will cooperate fully with the authorities." As two security guards entered and took a stunned, defeated Marcus by the arm, Alara felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled her knees. She had done it. She had faced the lions and she had won. After Marcus was gone, Julian addressed the board again. "Alara Vance has not only saved this company from a multi-billion-dollar disaster, she has exposed a traitor in our midst. She has done what none of you, with all your experience and prestige, could do. The question of her competency is answered." He then looked at Alara, his expression softening. "I am officially promoting her to the position of Senior Strategic Analyst, with a permanent seat on my advisory council. Any objections?" The boardroom, once a chamber of hostility, was now filled with stunned admiration. One by one, the board members, led by his aunt, nodded their approval. Alara had not just earned their respect, she had earned her place. Months passed. The name Alara Vance was no longer a punchline whispered in hallways. It was a legend. The story of the cleaner who became the company's savior was a modern fairy tale whispered with awe. Alara was no longer invisible. She now walked the halls of Vance Holdings with a quiet confidence, her insights and analyses becoming instrumental in shaping the company's future. She still wore simple, elegant suits, but the haunted look in her eyes was gone, replaced by a calm, clear-sighted purpose. She had found a new life, not by erasing her past, but by embracing the strength it had given her. One evening, Julian found her on the rooftop garden of the Vance building, a private oasis high above the clamor of the city. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the skyline. "I never get tired of this view," she said, not turning as he approached. "I used to clean the windows on this side. I always thought it was the best view in the city. The view is better with you in it," Julian said softly, coming to stand beside her. He was different now, too. The cold, isolated Ice King had thawed. The weight of his legacy seemed lighter on his shoulders. Elara had not just saved his company, she had shown him a different way to lead, a different way to live. "I never properly thanked you, Elara," he said. "Not just for saving the company, but for reminding me of what's important. For showing me that a person's worth isn't determined by their title or their bank account. You're the one who gave me the chance," she replied, finally turning to face him. "You saw something in me when no one else did." "Not even me, I saw the truth," he said, his gaze earnest and full of an emotion that went far beyond professional gratitude. "I saw a woman of incredible strength, intelligence, and integrity. And I saw someone who was just as lonely as I was." He reached out and took her hand. His touch was warm, gentle, and sure. It wasn't the touch of a powerful CEO claiming a prize. It was the touch of a man who had finally found his equal, his partner. "Elara," he said, his voice filled with a vulnerability she never thought possible. "I think my search for someone I can trust is over." She smiled, a true, radiant smile that reached her eyes. "Mine too." They stood there for a long time, hand in hand, watching the city lights flicker to life below, no longer two lonely souls but two people who had found their way home in the most unexpected of places. So, what if the person you overlook every single day holds the key to everything you've been looking for? What if the most valuable assets we have are the compassion and integrity we choose to show when the world isn't watching? The next time you see someone who seems invisible, look closer. You might just find a hidden treasure. What would you have done in that diner? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and please share this story if it moved you.